So good afternoon, everybody, and warm welcome to guests joining us here in Liverpool. It's nice to see so many of you coming along to talk about working with the politicians and with media. I'm Molly Evans. I'm Senior Media and Campaign Manager at Hospice UK, so I like working with the media and politicians, but it's really encouraging to see others wanting to learn more about that too. We've got people joining us online as well through a live stream. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. If you're watching online, please ask your question through the Q&A box, which should be just underneath the live stream on the screen that you're watching on. If you're in the hall with us in Liverpool, can you ask your questions through Slido, which I think we'll have some details on screen in just a second about how you can access Slido. We'll be recording this session, and the recording will be available 10 days or within 10 days from conference, and it will be on our new online platform, and there'll be details of how to access this in the conference brochure, which you should all have. And then for the really boring bits, please can everyone just make sure their phone is on silent before we start. And the other final thing is that there's no fire alarm test planned, so if you hear a noise, it's a real one, and act accordingly. So lovely. We're here today to talk about how to engage with the media and politicians. Hospices have always been seen as a really vital part of their local communities, and they rely on those relationships for funding and for raising awareness of their work and much more. So in this session, we'll explore how working well with your local politicians and local media can really enhance the work that you're all doing. So on our panel today, we have Peter Gibson, who's MP for Darlington. Peter's been an MP for Darlington since 2019. He's also served as a hospice trustee for 10 years. Currently, he's trustee for North Yorkshire and Heriot Hospice Home Care. Peter is a champion of hospices. He's co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group for hospice and end-of-life care, and he's been a great advocate for hospices and often worked together with us at Hospice UK to raise awareness of what is needed by hospices across the country, speaking up for them in Parliament, and he's supported our media work and added really valuable comment and insights to things we've done, so thank you, Peter. Alice Atkinson on the end here is Director of Income Generation and Communications at Bolton Hospice. Alice is responsible for leading all income generation, volunteering and marketing and communications work. She has a degree in public relations from Leeds Beckett University and completed the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy's certificate in philanthropic psychology in 2021. I practiced that one. Prior to her role at Bolton Hospice, she's worked in PR and comms for a variety of different causes in housing, healthcare, and was trustee for a mental health charity. And here we have Richard Duggan. Richard is Regional Editor North West, working on Bolton News, amongst other titles. He started his career in journalism in 2017 at Essex Live, where he was a reporter and a news editor. And during his time there, he was shortlisted for Young Journalist of the Year. He's worked at a variety of local media outlets across the UK, and in 2020 he was appointed Regional Editor for Lancashire and Greater Manchester, where he oversaw 5 titles. In January this year, he took on an expanded role as Regional Editor North West, overseeing titles in Lancashire, Greater Manchester, Cheshire and Merseyside. And in his role there, Richard's been a great support to Bolton Hospice, helping them share hospice stories with the wider community. So thank you, Richard. So first up, Peter, you're going to talk to us about your work with hospices and Hospice UK, and we've got a short video to kick that off, and then Peter will take to the lectern and talk to us about your work. Thank you, Peter.
A one-show viewer with a one big thank you for all the work they do in their local community.
Tonight it's the turn of super gran Nancy Spencer from Darlington. Now, she's raised thousands for a local hospice, so here's why she deserves a one big thank you.
Peter Gibson. Mr. Speaker, Nancy Spencer from Darlington has raised over £35,000 for St Teresa's Hospice in the last 25 years. Nancy's next adventure was to do a skydive, but having had a pacemaker fitted, her doctor refused to sign it off. However, undeterred, my 80-year-old constituent managed to secure sign-off for a wing walk. Will my right honourable friend join me in wishing Nancy well as she takes to the skies this Saturday?
Well, can I join my honourable friend in thanking Nancy for all her fantastic fundraising work, and of course wish her the best of luck for Saturday. I do wonder if my honourable friend will be joining her, and in particular many of my Many of my own constituents use St Rees Hospice over the years, so I know what fabulous work it does. But more generally, the hospice sector supports more than 300,000 people with life-limiting conditions in the UK every year, and I pay tribute to all the staff and volunteers working in palliative and end-of-life care for the incredible work they do.
Nancy deserves a one big thank you because what she has done for St Teresa's is absolutely incredible.
Age is just a number for 80-year-old Nancy Spencer from Darlington. Having a pacemaker didn't stop her from being strapped to a biplane to raise money for St Teresa's Hospice, which had looked after her husband Brian, who died 10 years ago.
She started because she knew that we needed help and support and she had time to give. And then her husband was admitted to the hospice. That has driven her on further.
Nancy's daredevil wing walk saw her flying at a jaw-dropping speed of 135 miles an hour. She felt her late husband Brian was with her the entire time.
I have no doubt that he was looking down on her. He would have said she was crazy, but he wouldn't have expected anything less.
We were all absolutely amazed. I'd take my hat off to her.
She has no fear, but I suppose she's got to an age in her life where she just thinks, just have a go at it, you know. You only get one shot at life, don't you?
Over the years, Nancy's raised over £35,000 for the hospice. Her motto is life's a precious gift. Make the most of it while supporting causes that matter.
Without Nancy's money, we wouldn't be able to offer the services that we do. She's an inspiration to all of us at St Teresa's Hospice, and we thank her for what she does.
Nancy totally puts the fun in her fundraising, from dressing up for sponsored afternoon teas to abseiling down her local hospital.
All the hospices across the country need people like this. I think she's meant to do this. We just could be proud of her.
What was it like, Nancy?
Exhilarating, amazing, scary at times, but fabulous.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A little tear comes to my eye when I watch that video of Nancy. She really, truly is an absolute inspiration, and it's a huge privilege to have her as one of my constituents in Darlington. As Molly explained to you, I'm here in a multitude of capacities, really. I did the Great North Run some 15 years ago to raise money for my local hospice in Northallerton, and I toddled along to hand over my cheque to the then chief executive at the time, and within sort of 24 hours I got a phone call asking me if I wanted to become a trustee. Little did I know that I would still be there some 15 years later, and we've gone through changes of leadership, growth, merger with another organisation, and it's great to see the team from North Yorkshire Hospice Care down on the front row there who've been given instructions to not heckle me this afternoon. Being a Member of Parliament, Parliament's full of people with a broad range of interests and experiences, and I got involved with the Hospice APPG very early on. We very sadly lost Jack Dromey, who was Harriet Harman's husband, who'd been the chairman of the APPG for a long time. And so I was able to fill Jack's position as the co-chair, along with Baroness Finlay of Llandaff, who sits in the House of Lords. And we've been able to do some incredible work, not least of which our report, which was published earlier in this year in respect of the impact of COVID and the lessons that we can learn. And I'm working very closely with Hospice UK currently on a new investigation into the funding that hospices around the country receive from their respective ICBs. So I look forward to that report being published and leading that conversation further as we engage with our ICBs and government further. And I just want to put on the record my incredible thanks to everybody at Hospice UK who helps and supports the all-party parliamentary group in Parliament on the work that we do there. The video that you've just seen of me in Parliament raising a parliamentary question is just one small example of what a politician can do in raising the profile of a local charity, a local fundraiser, and a very important cause such as the hospice movement. And whenever I talk to colleagues in Parliament about their local hospice, they always talk very positively about them, but I don't hear them talking about them in Parliament itself often enough. I don't know whether that's because the opportunity for them hasn't arisen, or you as hospices haven't engaged with your Member of Parliaments as much as you possibly could have done. Politicians are incredibly time poor, despite what the media might tell you about what we get up to in our spare time. But I would strongly encourage you to invite your local MP in on a regular basis. Keep them updated, share your newsletters, sign them up as a fundraiser. Just this very weekend, I have signed up to do the Santa Run for St Teresa's Hospice in Darlington. I've shared that information on my social media channels and engaged with the community in a very positive way. It's a positive story. It's not political, so it doesn't matter whether you're on the left or the right of the political spectrum and who you support politically. That engagement with your local politicians and your local councillors as well as your members of Parliament is a really great way to embed yourself in the local community and engage with those elected representatives. So I use the story of Nancy as an inspiration. She was a great springboard for me being able to raise the story of hospices and fundraising, and the Prime Minister very kindly then went on to outline further the impact that hospices have around the country, and that's news that, well, that's not news to us, but getting a slot at Prime Minister's Question Time to give that a national profile. And there are millions of people who do actually watch PMQs. There are people who tune in each and every week. Many of us who are at work during the working week don't see it, but I do know that many millions of people around the country do that. So in conclusion, I just want to say it's a huge privilege to be involved in this amazing movement, both as a fundraiser, as a trustee, and the work that I'm doing in Parliament on behalf of you. Politicians get an incredibly bad press. You only need to look at the news over the last week. We get an incredible bad press. But the vast majority of us there are there for the right reasons and to do good. And I know that you are all there to do good, and I would encourage you to engage with us in order that we can work together and improve things for our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and best of luck with the Santa Run when it comes around. So next up, Alice from Bolton Hospice is going to talk to us about how they work with the media, and Richard from Bolton News and Other Titles is going to interject as well with how you've worked together. Thank you both.
Hi everyone. So Molly asked us to speak today because we've had some great success working together in partnership, and particularly this year for Bolton Hospice, we've had some degree of success in terms of some of our media relations work and kind of raising the profile of some of the challenges that we have at the hospice. I just wanted to start off by giving you a bit of context of the team that we have at Bolton Hospice, because I know all of our hospices are so varied and kind of how we're set up and what resources we have. So in terms of dedicated marketing and comms resource, as well as myself leading those functions, we have a full-time marketing manager who actually has a dual role as a database manager as well, so probably only 70 to 80% of her time is on kind of marketing and comms. We have a full-time marketing and comms coordinator who does most of our web and social and a bit of design and a bit of print. And we also have a data and direct marketing coordinator as well who does all of our insight and analytics and all of our direct mail and some of our email marketing as well. And just for context as well, at Bolton Hospice, our turnover is about 6 million. So that kind of gives you a bit of an idea of the size of our hospice. The other internal expertise we've got is really key, I believe, to some of the successes that we've had from our kind of media work. So we have a great volunteer who came on board with us this year, who's a freelance journalist. She's had a very, very long career in journalism, is kind of now coming to the end of that career, wants to continue to work and do something else with her time as well. She also works as a media consultant, and we utilise her skills for a lot of our storytelling work, a lot of the case studies that we gather, and she's just got the best skills and, more importantly, the time to dedicate to getting those stories from patients and families, but also from supporters and fundraisers, that we can utilise time and time again in our media work. So that's been really crucial for us. I think the other thing that's really been significant for us is having a trustee on our board with a media background. That's definitely something that completely kind of changed how we approach working with the media and helped us to really up our game, really. Obviously, there's loads of benefits of that. That was a specific role and actually a specific person that we targeted and approached to get onto our board, and I would certainly advocate for hospices doing more of that and recognising that is a skill that is really beneficial to us, particularly as we kind of move forward in the challenging circumstances that so many of us are facing. And he really helps obviously bring his contact and his network, but it's not really just about that. It's also about demonstrating to the other board members the strategic importance of communications and the strategic value of engaging with the media and how that can actually really help to achieve our organisational strategy, and that it's not just about updating our community about what we're doing. It is about that, but actually there's more strategic importance to it as well. He also really supports the case for investing in marketing and comms, and that's really beneficial to me to have that support. And is also a really useful sounding board, and gives really good advice to me and my team when we need it. That's not something that we use on a day-to-day basis because, of course, we've got those skills within our team. But certainly when there are things that are a bit more tricky, it came up this morning about assisted dying. So, for example, our position statement on assisted dying, we can kind of get some extra tips and pointers from him and just help to really kind of solidify the comms around certain things. So like I said earlier, we've had some really great success this year with our media work. We made a strategic decision earlier in the year to specifically raise the profile of the hospice's financial situation. And we've managed to get some really good coverage on BBC. We've been on ITV a couple of times, regionally and nationally. Our chief executive's been in the studio, and we've had quite a bit of filming at the hospice. And of course, we've got our partnership with our local newspaper as well, which of all things is the most valuable to us, really, because we are a local charity. We operate within our local community, and we're really fortunate in Bolton that we have a community who are really engaged in both in the hospice, but also they engage so much with their local press, and we're really fortunate that we have that kind of vested interest, I guess, really. So our kind of journey this year, like I say, we took a strategic decision at board level earlier this year to start to talk to the public for the first time, really, about the financial deficit that we anticipated us to have in this financial year, which for us is £1.2 million. And the reason we did that, there was various reasons really. Specifically, we hadn't kind of gone out during COVID and had a crisis appeal at that time, because at that time our reserves were okay. We were doing all right. There wasn't really a rationale to do that. But this year, like I say, we'd got our deficit budget. We knew that we couldn't continue to keep quiet about that. We knew that we deserved to tell all of our stakeholders about that and about the implications of that if we weren't able to solve that issue. So part of that was around generating more income and hoping to close that gap a little bit through that. But like I say, more strategically, it was around applying a little bit more pressure to our commissioners that we've been talking to for many, many years about the funding model and about the sustainability of our funding and about how that works. And it was just about applying a little bit more pressure, kind of ramping that up with the aim of kind of getting some action, I guess. And that started really with the Sunday Times article from earlier this year that all came from a conversation with Hospice UK, having our chief exec having responded to their survey around the financial situation. My chief executive, Lee, had a really in-depth conversation with the journalist for this piece that unfortunately got pulled from print edition and only went online and didn't feature us at all. And that was kind of going to be our springboard for further comms regionally and locally to kind of gain some traction on that. So things changed. It didn't quite work out as we planned, but we still were able to utilise that. And then following that, of course, there was the debate in Westminster Hall, and our MP Yasmin Qureshi and another MP for Bolton, we have 3 in Bolton, Chris Green, both spoke advocating for Bolton Hospice at that debate, which then provided kind of the springboard that we needed for more comms. Just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the foundations that we've got in place at Bolton Hospice that enabled us to kind of make the most of the opportunities we had media-wise this year, because even though we're talking about engaging with the media and with politicians and they're all external relations activities, actually for us the foundations are all pretty much internal things. I spoke about the team earlier. Of course, we need to have a well-resourced media and comms team if we're able to get the most out of our comms moving forwards. That is something that we have to have. Richard will talk a little bit about the coverage that he affords us in the Bolton News, and we absolutely have to make sure that we can fulfil that obligation on our side and that we have the content and the stories and the images and everything that go with it, and we just wouldn't be able to do that without having a team that's properly staffed, really. And I know the case for investing in marketing and comms staff at hospices can be quite challenging. Internal relationships, again, is absolutely crucial. Again, we've spent many years building those relationships between our staff, between clinical and non-clinical colleagues, between marketing staff and frontline service staff. And we do that at all levels, and that's something that's really helped get to the stories, really. You know, we can have the best contacts and networks and be really proactive with our media work, but if we aren't finding out about those amazing stories that happen in our hospices from the staff that are on the front line of providing that care, then they won't go anywhere. And again, that's at all levels in the organisation. I've spoken about board level, but also at senior leadership team level. It's my view that it's really important that comms is something that all of the senior leadership team understand the importance of and the strategic role of, and championing that is my responsibility within our organisation. Not super exciting, but policies, I think, play a part as well. We have a really robust media management policy at the hospice, and we also have policies that govern things like MP visits. And I think that just provides a real framework for staff to work to, and they understand what their obligations are. We have a really good matrix, for example, in our media management policy that will indicate who gets sign-off on something, depending on what publication it is, whether this is something that's local or regional or national or international, and how controversial it is or might possibly be. And that's really come from learning, you know, when things have happened and board members have not been on the same side around different things and have maybe thought that actually that should have been a board level sign off and it was a CEO sign off, or it was a CEO sign off and actually that could have been done by a manager. So we just have robust policies, I would say, that help to govern kind of what we do and don't do, who our spokespeople are, so that everyone kind of understands that we're all what we're doing, essentially. And that kind of all links to our strategy. Again, at Bolton Hospice, we review our comms strategy and our priorities every year. And our priorities, you know, we start with loads, and I'm sure you can all identify with that feeling of there's so many things that you want to do, but realistically we have to trim those down and focus, and that's one of the reasons we've had the success we have this year, is because we've been really focused on what we wanted to do, and what we wanted to do was raise awareness of this big deficit we've got and what we want to do about it, and get some more local and regional and national coverage to support that. And just to talk a little bit about our approach to it, following on from what Peter said, really, that relationship management approach is what we do. We treat our relationships with our MPs and with the journalists and the other staff at our local newspapers like we would our supporter relationships. So it's our role to inspire them about the hospice, to engage them, to motivate them, to make them advocates for us, to show them the impact of their support, and really just excite them about the hospice. So we do focus on that, and we focus on them as long-term relationships as well. Obviously, being responsive is really key in terms of responding to media inquiries and creating a demand and then being able to fulfil it. But also, I would say we definitely have not been as proactive as I would have liked to have been in the last year with our media, but we've still had really good results. And I think a lot of that is just because we've responded to opportunities that have presented themselves to us. Some of that through work with Hospice UK and opportunities that have come that way, but other things as well. Sometimes it's not always about being proactive, and we don't always have the resources that we would want to be as proactive as we want to. But if you keep an eye out for opportunities and you take the little opportunities when they come, then they can build into something more. Flexibility is obviously really key. We know in hospices how quickly things can change, so we are always building in flexibility to the work that we do with the media and managing expectations around wanting to have patients and families that are able to talk to a film crew when they're coming in, and then things changing. So we always try and have kind of a backup and then another backup to make sure that we're not raising expectations that then we can't meet. And also that comes from the other side as well. As Peter said, politicians are very busy. They might be planning a visit and they're not able to do it. There might be something planned for the front page that then gets pushed because it's not, there's something else that comes up. So it's being flexible around expectations there as well. Political impartiality obviously is key for us as well as hospices. Like I say, we have 3 MPs in Bolton and we offer all of them the same opportunities. So it was actually Yasmin Qureshi, one of our MPs, who approached us in advance of the Westminster Hall debate, and she asked us for information about the hospice's position. And we sent that back, and then we also sent it to our other MPs as well. So it's not just in the invites that we're sending out that we're impartial, but also when we're asked for information, we then share that and we keep all of them up to date so they all know what's happening and what we're doing with each other. And then finally, I think the other thing that's been really important for us, and again, having a trustee on the board with a media background, is helping us to be aware of the risks of media work generally, but also where there are controversial topics. And by that, I mean not being risk averse, because I think a few years ago, we probably wouldn't have gone out and had the campaign that we've had locally in the local media and done the national and regional media that we've done, because I think we would have been too worried about the adverse effects of that. We would have been too worried about the impact it would have on recruitment at a time when recruitment is challenging anyway. We would have been too worried about what people might have said about our level of reserves, or what, you know, cutting services and all of the difficult things that have come up in conversation. But we just try to be as proactive about that as possible and plan for and be aware of those risks so that we're going into it with open eyes and we accept that there is a level of risk and that things might not pan out exactly how we want them to. But that ultimately the benefit of doing it outweighs the risk of not doing it at all. And again, that links back to what's in our strategy and making sure that that's kind of all tied up with our priorities. So yeah, we've had a great relationship with the Bolton News for a really long time actually, And we've had a really great partnership, particularly this year, on our kind of big campaign that, again, was all linked to the hospice's financial situation and how we could generate more income locally, but also call, like I say, for commissioners to provide a fairer funding deal for us. So I'll hand over to Richard and he can tell you a little bit more about how we work together.
So from my point of view, local media, we are there to champion our local people and our local institutions, and there isn't an institution, I think, more beloved in Bolton than the hospice. So when we did have that conversation with Lee around the CEO around the funding issues and the deficit, it felt to me that this was a time for us as a local newspaper excuse me, sorry, to really champion this beloved institution. So it was a no-brainer for us. Editors are always looking for the next big campaign for us to support. And they're often, I would say, not always as worthy as they should be. But this was a no-brainer to me that we had to do something to help the hospice. And I knew that it was a difficult ask asking people during a cost of living crisis to donate their money when people are very worried about paying their electricity bills, how they're going to feed their children. But we knew our argument with this campaign was that ultimately the hospice has been there for so many families in Bolton over so many years and been there for the most difficult times. And now the hospice was in need of our help, and it was our duty as the local paper and the local community to get together and try and raise as much money as possible. Now, we've always had, like we said, a very good relationship with the hospice. We have a page dedicated to the hospice every week, which is full of really lovely, inspiring stories about the brilliant members of staff that are there, people's inspiring stories who are being treated there. But we felt that we could take this a little bit further and that we, as a media organisation, could dedicate a little bit more of our own time to giving those stories a bit more attention, particularly online, where the bulk of our audience now is. So we've really ramped up our coverage. Every week, members of my staff will be badgering Alice's team, asking them have they got any great stories we can tell. And there's always a great story to tell from the hospice. And I think when I wrote in my open letters to readers in an editorial asking them to donate to our campaign, I was very honest and I said that I had many misconceptions about hospices until I went to visit one. And I was taken around Bolton Hospice, and it was ultimately such a place of joy and not a place of sadness. And that to lose such an institution would be heartbreaking for Bolton. And also the reality that actually if 6 beds were to close, that strain on the NHS, which we all know, we're constantly talking about NHS funding and NHS not having enough money to, and not enough beds. So ultimately I felt that really we as a community needed to put our hands in our pockets and donate. Now, you might say, well, have you donated, Richard? Has your paper donated? We haven't donated any money physically, actual physically donated money, put it in a pot. But the amount of time and resource we've dedicated to it has been significant. But we've seen a return in that. We've seen people being really pleased with the coverage, coming back to us to read more hospice stories. So if a local newspaper editor says to you, oh, I just don't really think it's going to interest that many people, I can't really afford to dedicate any time to it, I would say that's not true. I think it's been a really mutually beneficial arrangement where we've supported the hospice has been able to tell their stories, and ultimately we've told the stories of local people in Bolton. So we've had a really brilliant time with the campaign. We've been shortlisted for 2 press awards, one at the Media Freedom Awards, which is on Wednesday, so fingers crossed everyone that we win that for Campaign of the Year, and also for the Making a Difference Award with the which we unfortunately didn't win last week. We were beaten by a campaign in Scotland, but again it just shows you that this kind of campaign, which I would argue hasn't taken up much of my time or much of my team's time, it's been an absolute joy to work on. It will get the recognition. And I'm hoping that the other editors will have seen the campaign that we've done this year and will think, actually, you know what, we can launch our own campaign with our own hospices who may be facing similar difficulties that Bolton has. So ultimately, it's been a real joy to cover, and we've had really, really positive feedback from it. And as an editor, like I say, sometimes I feel like all I do is worry about budgets and newspaper sales, but actually it's been so lovely to get something back on a personal level. Is there anything else you think I should mention?
That's it, yeah.
No. It's, so like I say, what I would always encourage you to do is try and get in front of your local newspaper editor, even the news editor, badger them, ask for a meeting, get them to come down and see the hospice for themselves, because I often can just send reporters out to cover these things, and actually I'm really glad that I went myself and got to see the amazing work that's being done at the hospice firsthand.
Thank you both. That really was just a perfect example of how well things can go for newspaper and for the hospice when you work together. But it was really nice as well to hear about how you engage with your MPs and how they raise issues for you in Parliament, and how you've been able to help with our work as well at Hospice UK. We're really, really grateful. So we're moving on to the Q&A section of this panel. And we've got some questions coming through on Slido, which I'll just have a look at. There's one here that came through when you were doing your talk, Peter, and I think is kind of aimed towards you. It says, some hospices are struggling with their funding and influencing commissioning locally. Would you recommend talking to our local MP about how we can influence the wider NHS?
Yes, absolutely. And what I didn't cover in my talk was a piece of work that I've been doing locally. So the Tees Valley of five local authorities represented by 8 MPs, 5 Conservative, 2 Labour. We've got 4 hospices in that patch. We're obviously all getting to grips with the new ICB structure. We've got a new chief executive at our ICB. We got together and we worked together, the 8 MPs. We worked collaboratively. We held some meetings in Parliament. We invited various individuals along, including the chief executives of all of those hospices. We wrote letters, we held meetings. So working collaboratively across party, just as you will be in Bolton with your 3 MPs from different parties. That working together of MPs with the ICB is really useful. I'd love to say that it's actually delivered the results that we want. It hasn't yet, but we've certainly put a marker down about how important palliative care is, how important it is to correctly commission those services, how important it is to make sure that funding actually follows the patient being directed into the hospice sector. And I think we've made it quite clear to our local ICB that we mean business, and we're going to keep pushing for that.
Thank you. The next question says, as a sector, how do we compete with the coverage that many of the national charities are getting through high-quality TV adverts and celebrity endorsements? And before I kind of take this to Alice and Richard, I just wanted to add something from my perspective at Hospice UK. We've absolutely been able to tell really good stories about the hospice sector with a kind of combination of things, and we've been able to cut through what is a really difficult and competitive news cycle. And the way we've done that is by having data and information from our members to help us tell those stories. And if we've got a really strong figure, we can use that as a hook to hang a story onto and speak up for what the hospice sector needs more generally. So engagement from our members is really key there, to provide this kind of package where maybe we might have some quotes from hospice chief execs talking about what's going on in their area, or maybe a local hospice might host some filming, or a chief exec might speak to a journalist, as is the case with Lee from Bolton Hospice in the Sunday Times. And if we can bring in that political engagement too, as we have done with Peter, we've been able to include, a quote from him as co-chair of the APPG for hospice and end-of-life care. And it just gives us a really strong package to take to journalists that it's quite an easy story then to sell when we're all speaking with kind of one voice. So I just wanted to say that personally, that if we all work together and kind of join up and support each other's opportunities, we can have that cut through. But I will just talk to Richard and Alice, and probably Richard as a journalist here, how can we compete with a celebrity endorsement or a big TV ad? It is quite a big ask.
There is a misconception that people don't really read local news. I myself did believe that when I was a trainee journalist and I had dreams of working for national newspapers, which I just wouldn't do now. I absolutely love regional and local news. I think that's where all newspaper really good stories come from. They start at a local newspaper and they end up at somewhere like the Sunday Times. so many people read their local newspaper, whether online or in print. The Bolton News is, I believe, at last check, the third most read newspaper in terms of newspaper sales and geography in NewsQuest, which is an incredible achievement. I'm not quite sure what I've done, but it has worked somehow. So we reach something like, forgive me if I've gotten the figure wrong, 84% of people in Bolton every single month, which, you know, again, that's a hell of a lot of people. I would say sometimes it's less about the flashiness of, you know, having a celebrity endorsement. You know, don't get me wrong, we've had, I think in the past we've had Peter Kay, who's, you know, obviously very famous local Boltonian, getting involved. So, you know, you might have local celebrities who are very true to their roots, who will get involved and work with their local newspaper, work with their local hospice. But ultimately, what I find sells a story is the human angle. And if you can find that really good human angle, I think that's worth its weight in gold, more so than any celebrity endorsement. So for me personally, as a newspaper editor, I don't worry too much about that because I know how many people my stories reach in Bolton every month. I'm not concerned. So I think working with your local newspaper is a really great start, and you'd be surprised by how many people you will reach.
Thank you. Alice, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Richard's saying, and I think it is about playing to your strengths. And yes, absolutely, national charities do have some big names and they have some big budgets, and we can't compete at that level, but actually, you know, they would give anything to have the kind of community engagement that we have as local hospices in our local community. And actually that's what they're really envious of, is how we're really at the heart of our community. Our supporters and our community really feel an ownership of our organisations and almost a family connection with our organisations, and actually that is what our strength is. And for us, it's great to get that regional and national coverage and profile, but that is what complements our local media work, not the other way around. Our priority is always that local community, and therefore the local media that connect us to them. So I think it's absolutely just about recognising that there might be things that you can't compete on, but there are things that you do better than those charities, and it's about continuing to kind of stick with that, really.
Thank you. We've got a question here about your campaign working in partnership, so Bolton Hospice and Bolton News. Can you tell us a bit more about what the result of your campaign achieved? So did you raise more money off the back of it, I suppose, is the key thing, but other achievements as well?
It's still going, isn't it? It's not going anywhere. We said that we'd initially run it until Christmas and then review, obviously, from my point of view, are we doing enough? Are you getting the right support that you need? And vice versa.
Yeah, it is still running. I mean, it's definitely getting results. We were chatting just before about the financial side of things. Obviously, we're due an update to readers pretty soon on the financial side of things. So maybe check out the Bolton News in the next couple of weeks. You might hear a bit more about that. But yeah, so from a financial point of view, absolutely, we've had an amazing response from our community. But actually, there was an impact that we weren't really expecting, which was around people donating more to our charity shops. Our charity shops have never had as much stock, particularly over the school summer holidays, which is typically really quiet. We were completely inundated. We've had more volunteering inquiries come through. We've been able to leverage the coverage that we've had locally with some of our suppliers to negotiate discounts moving forwards, which has all been really beneficial. So yeah, I mean, even kind of staff engagement and just general awareness. Susanna, our nurse, who was on the front page of the Bolton News when we launched the campaign, I kind of called her and was like, oh, you do know it's going on the front page, don't you? You know, sorry about that, because I know it's just, you know, take a quick picture and then the next thing you know, you're famous. And she was like, oh, that's brilliant, because I know my local MP, so I'm going to take him a copy and I'm going to write him a letter and I'm going to tell him, you know, look, you need to read this, you need to look at what's happening at the hospice. So yeah, there's definitely, obviously, the financial side for us has been successful. Again, as Peter said, you know, movement is slow with the integrated care boards, but it's absolutely helped us there as well, and you know, we are making progress, I think, albeit slow but sure.
Yeah.
I think it's probably also slightly reinvigorated some of our readers' relationship with the hospice And now that when they're thinking of, oh, in my will, am I going to donate any money? Oh, actually, can I make a donation? Can I raise money by doing, you know, a Santa run, that sort of thing? I think people are going, oh, actually, no, we could do it to Bolton Hospice, which I think has been brilliant as well. Because, generally, there are so many worthwhile, amazing organisations in Bolton, but I just think this has just reminded people not to take the hospice for granted.
Yeah, and I think people do take hospices for granted because, you know, they think that we'll always be there, and I think the campaign has given them that little bit of a shock of actually, that's not guaranteed. If something doesn't change, that isn't guaranteed. And I called a lot of the people that were making donations kind of initially in the first couple of the weeks of the campaign to thank them for their donations. And something that they said to me time and time again is we would never have thought that the hospice could be at risk. We would just never have imagined that could happen. And I think it was really useful for us to very carefully put that position out there so that people did understand the situation that so many of us are facing.
Thank you both. Yeah, I frequently find that if we're doing media coverage, even as Hospice UK, there's maybe the specific issue we want to talk about. But first of all, we just want to remind people how hospices are funded and the fact that they rely on charitable income for so much of their work. So it's great to hear that's kind of, you know, jigged that in people's memories so that they're also aware. I've got a question for you here, Peter. It says, aside from raising awareness, what are the key asks hospices should have of their MPs to have the biggest impact?
The key ask of MPs?
Yes, of their local MPs.
I think it comes down to awareness, and I'll repeat the point again about how busy we are and how many pressures we're actually under to be both in the constituency, be in Westminster, to be at multiple different debates, to prioritise one campaign over another. And so I don't think there's a problem in telling you all to constantly, repeatedly badger your local MP. I don't know how much you badger your three in Bolton, but
quite a lot.
but I think that's the answer. I think you've got to keep that pressure up, and it can be pressure in terms of pushing them to have that fight with the ICB. It can be pushing them to raise the point in a Westminster Hall debate or ask a question about funding, but it can be some of the nice stuff as well, like promoting Nancy's fundraising, which raised hospices generally's profile, but also inviting them along to every time you've got a fundraiser, asking them to share your fundraising efforts, your campaigns, etc., using their social media profiles as well. I just wanted to come back onto the last point about engaging with the media. Our local news quest titled The Northern Echo, we managed to get 3 front pages out of the engagement that the 8 MPs had with the ICB on behalf of our local hospices. So you ran a great campaign and a positive story about a negative, and we ran, you know, with the Northern Echo and working together some quite negative titles, but again they had that same galvanising effect on the community and the realising that funding comes from the community and isn't all government supplied.
These things do tend to kind of feed themselves as well, don't they? You get a bit of media coverage, it inspires another human story or some MP political engagement that you can take forward as well. So Alice, we've got a question saying if you had limited budget or resources, what would be your priority to make the biggest impact? And I suppose that speaks to your question about the team structure and how you kind of get buy-in and the right resource. Yeah, it's really challenging. I don't think any of us ever have as much resources as we would want to. I would say I absolutely echo what Richard said about those local relationships with local editors. I think that would be my kind of number one, really, just because they can afford you that coverage that you're just not going to be able to get that elsewhere, and you can build momentum from there. Like you said, you know, one thing can lead to another, and before you know it, you've got stories kind of coming from all angles, and you can use that to continue to kind of build that momentum. It definitely is challenging, but I think that would be my first port of call if it's a one-man band or it's a part-time member of staff. That's what I would be doing. Yeah. Thank you. Just coming back to you here, Peter, we've got a question about how can MPs influence their manifesto to include palliative and end-of-life care? So if it was specifically in manifestos, this would support the sector to take priority in other delivery plans, such as the NHS mandate. What opportunities could we use together?
Well, now's the right time to be trying to influence manifestos. You know, we will have a general election at some point between now and late January 2025. So political parties are in the process of pulling together ideas for that manifesto. So having those conversations with people now, be it both locally with MPs, but also Hospice UK engaging with the major political parties at a national level to influence those. We've had a great success in getting that obligation to commission palliative care into the Health and Social Care Act, which is fantastic. And, you know, I can't praise Baroness Finlay enough for the work that she did in the Lords to make sure that that actually happened. Things happen after legislation's gone onto the statute book. I think a lot of people think that when you get a piece of legislation through, the world suddenly changes, and it doesn't. Attitudes take time to feed through. Policies take time to feed through, and we haven't yet, in my view, genuinely felt as a sector the impact of that palliative care obligation in the Health and Social Care Act, because I don't think the ICBs have got to grips with what their current commissioning looks like in their region, if indeed any, and what the funding of that looks like. They're in difficult financial circumstances, and that has always been the case. The hospice sector, to the best of my knowledge, is always doing battle with whoever is commissioning local services, whether it be PCTs, CCGs, ICBs now. So we've got the legislation on the statute book that palliative care obligation is there. We've got to inform and educate decision makers inside the ICBs and ministers in the Department for Health and civil servants in the Department for Health and all of your local politicians that that obligation isn't enough. It needs to be followed through with some clear guidance about what that palliative care looks like, what commissioning looks like. Is there a postcode lottery? Are you going to eliminate the postcode lottery? How much funding are you going to put into it? So those are the important conversations, I think, to be having in the lead up to the next general election if the hospice sector wants to have an impact in what is contained within those manifestos at the next general election.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to join the dots between local lobbying and lobbying on the national level as well. And I know that our public affairs team would always be happy to kind of provide stats or advice or support ahead of any engagement you have with your local MPs, just so we can kind of, like Peter says, like join the dots and make sure that everyone's asking for the same thing, which gives you the best chance.
There's just another point in there as well. If you are in communication with your local MPs, ask them if they can get involved with the all-party group in Parliament for hospices. There's a myriad of different APPGs in Parliament, all competing for MPs' time and attention. But the hospice one is well supported with a wide range of members in both the Lords and the Commons across all parties. But we can always do with more engagement, more supportive MPs. So, you know, I'm not sure if you've had that conversation with the three in Bolton, but please do encourage them to get involved with the APPG.
You've kind of given a lovely segue then into another question for you, actually, which is how can local hospices support the next stages of the APPG on hospice funding that you mentioned in your speech? So whether it's asking their MP to get involved. But
Yes, so at some point, hopefully later this year before Christmas, the next report that the APPG produces in respect of that work on the funding that comes from ICBs to hospices, which I think is going to shine a real spotlight and a real opportunity for local newspapers to shine a really direct, visible spotlight on it, is to encourage your local MPs to come to the launch event, to share, to raise questions, to come to the debate that we plan, to raise questions of ministers, to write letters to ministers, to actively engage with their local hospice as an illustration of the points that we will be illustrating in the report. Everyone who's got a hospice in their constituency will have a local angle that they can frame discussion and debate about that report that we produce that gives them the opportunity to raise the hospice profile further and continue that debate and discussion with ICBs.
Thank you. I've got a question here for kind of all of you. It's still about kind of connecting with local MPs or local commissioners, but it says, how can media specifically help hospices further connect with local commissioners so they're seen as a key solution to support local health and care provision? So essentially, from your point of view, you'll probably have some system knowledge, but also from you guys, how can media really tap into those like specific audiences and make really specific asks like that?
What I would say is, and I found this from when Lee gave her very honest appraisal of the situation, was that was really refreshing. I think sometimes people can shy away and not want to be honest about how bad things are. And I think that was the wise decision of the board to say, actually, no, we're going to be really honest with our patrons and say, no, we're having a really difficult time. We're not going to sugarcoat it. What I would say to any CEOs or any spokespeople for hospices is, if you come to us with an angle and a story that you want hard answers for, make some quite bold statements, say exactly what you think, because we have to get a right of reply. And if you're going on the record and saying, no, we want answers, we want to know this, we're gonna put on record what we're feeling, they've got to respond. Or they can choose not to respond, but that's never in their interest not to respond. So yes, I would say start asking the hard questions, start being very bold in your assertions, because that will help us as local newspaper editors say, actually, there's some quite tough questions to be answered here. What are you going to respond to that? So that's what I would say. Be bold, be assertive.
Agree completely. Now is the time to be bold, not when we've had to close beds or shrink services. That will be too late. For us, again, it's about weighing up the risks. You know, there are sensitivities there. We don't want to push that door too hard and have it slam in our face. We have to be mindful of those delicate relationships we have with commissioners. But we absolutely have, we deserve, and our communities deserve, to have us fight for their right to access good quality palliative and end-of-life care in their community. And actually, we should be doing that. We absolutely should be fighting for it. And if we don't, then who will? So, yeah, absolutely. We do have to be bold, I would agree.
And they can just be angry at the journalists for ringing their press officers up rather than the hospices. So, you know, we can use us as the bad guys. We always are. So it's fine.
Yeah, and we can kind of... And that's the other thing. You know, there is sensitivity. Journalists write things in the way that us within the hospice wouldn't. You know, they use words that we wouldn't. And sometimes that feels really uncomfortable when you see those words associated with your organisation, and you can kind of take that quite personally and wonder if there's going to be criticism about that. But actually, sometimes you can use that to your advantage, and actually you can have that more dramatic element in the media that gets that message across in a way that you wouldn't be able to say yourself. So you can kind of utilise the media that way as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I really agree that now is the time to be bold, not in months or years when perhaps it might be too late. You've got to make these arguments now. I wondered if you had anything to add into that.
So we had the kind of battle that we were having the Tees Valley with the 4 hospices that we have across the region. We really tried to make it clear that these were the decisions of the ICB. That's their responsibility to commission these services and, if appropriate, to fund them. Because we as politicians get the blame for whatever goes wrong in society, and every single thing that has ever happened is always the MP's fault. But the decision about who commissions what, where, is a decision by bureaucrats inside our ICBs who are not publicly accountable in the same way that we are. So it was actually really quite refreshing having a bunch of MPs, bunch of politicians from all sides of the spectrum, our local newspaper and our local hospices all sort of turning our firepower, if you like, on the regional commissioners. And I think if you ask the public in our communities, we've kind of turned that narrative around, and the people in our community now know that it isn't the politician's decision about that commissioning, it's the commissioner's decisions about what comes to our local hospices. So, yeah, putting the pressure on the ICB is something I'm all for.
Thank you. Just a slightly different topic now, but again, a question for all of you. How can the media and MPs help in reaching underrepresented communities that might need hospice care?
Again, I would say having some honest communication between hospices and the media and saying, look, this is what we want to do. Ask us our opinions on how we think we can achieve it. Also, I know there's obviously lots of statistics around certain communities not getting hospice care. But again, I think it's just a simple conversation, a simple question of going, Richard, can we do a story on this? And, you know, it might be that I might have to say, well, Alice, why? What's the point of the story? You know, what's the sell to readers? And actually, often, once you've had that conversation, it's very easy to do. So I think a lot of it is just communication, saying, we really need to get this message out there. Can you help us do this? And it might be that we go, okay, we don't think this will work in a traditional format, but have you got any members of, let's say, the BAME community who you feel that might be getting hospice care that we could speak to around their own access to hospice care? You know, video is so important now for social media. Facebook pushes it more than it does news articles. It's a big part of, I think, Elon Musk's plan for X. So I would say just reach out and just try and have an honest conversation with your registrar and say, we really need to do this. The big difference between a hospice and other organisations is you're very unlikely, I think, to be targeted by the commercial wing of a newspaper because by your very nature you are a charity or a hospice, whereas some other organisations will reach out to us and expect free coverage when they actually have very large coffers that they can spend from their marketing budget. So again, I would just say just reach out and just ask the honest ask for an honest conversation and, you know, sell it to us, tell us why it's important, tell us why we have a duty to report on that story.
Thank you. I feel like you both want to speak. I was just going to ask Alice, have you found that the media has been a good kind of avenue to reach underrepresented communities or engaging with your local MP as well? Has that helped you, or your local MPs in this case?
Yeah, I think actually it's wider than just the local MPs for us. So as Peter referred to before, there's also councillors, many more in number than the MPs. And that's where we've had some real successes engaging with our local councillors as well and our mayors in Bolton over the years. And again, for us, it's about finding your advocates. It's finding that person with that connection or that passion and just helping to develop and grow that, really. We've had some great success with some events, awareness evenings. We've utilised the town hall for some of those. We've done them at the hospice. We've kind of themed them and timed them in with Ramadan and had, and again, that's kind of been an integrated approach to raising funds for the hospice during Ramadan, but also raising awareness of hospice services during that time, involving our education team in some of that work. So absolutely engaging in politicians, but not just thinking about MPs, thinking about the kind of broader people within the political, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. And Peter, I know obviously you'll have things to share on this in your role as a local MP, but as a hospice trustee as well, have you been able to see how the media and your work as an MP can engage with
I think how I want to answer this is the conversation that we've been having regionally with our local ICB and the mapping that they're about to do or that they are undertaking to do to understand what palliative care is commissioned, I think is going to be the key driver here, because that research is going to reveal who hospices are reaching and who they're not reaching. And I think that picture is going to be different across the country. So I think it's worthwhile asking, you know, the assembled company here, asking their respective ICBs what mapping have they done in respect of the provision of palliative care, what sectors of their community are being reached by palliative care, perhaps not commissioned with the hospice, but perhaps with another organisation or in some other way, to try and understand what the actual unmet need is, rather than saying we haven't got a diverse constituency of people in our hospice, therefore we must be doing something wrong. Trying to understand the complete picture across the region and who's supplying services, to understand what kind of marketing and sales message needs to be put in place to understand how you reach those harder to reach groups, organisations and communities further. So again, I'm pushing it back to the ICBs.
No, I think it's a good point that they do need to have an idea of what need is in their area to make those informed decisions, and that will be helpful to your work as well. We've got a question here that's kind of more about that like back office media work. And Richard, I'm going to put this to you first, but Alice, you might have something to share too. Someone says their only local paper decided to publish their incoming CEO's salary, which caused quite a stir. What can they do to improve media outcomes without stoking the fire?
Yeah, so that story's it's never going to do you any favor. It's never going to improve relations, is it? I think my advice, and Peter will know this better than anyone, because journalists and politicians don't always have the best relationships. Sometimes we publish stories that you don't like, and that's our job. If we publish something, we generally think it's in the public interest. And again, there's always been a conversation around what people in the charity sector earn, and that's never going to go away. What I would say, and I think Alice mentioned this earlier in a different area, is don't take negative media coverage personally. It's not personal. It's really not. We don't operate like that. We haven't really got time to have vendettas. It's just not what we do. If you have had some negative media coverage, you know, and this is easier than it's easier said than done, but you have to just try and take it on the chin and move on. But don't just shy away from speaking to your local newspaper, then make a proactive effort to go, look, we've had a difficult relationship, you published a story, we're obviously not happy with it, what can we do to work together in the future to have a better conversation? This has happened to me a few times with different organisations, and the best relationships we've ended up having are the ones where the CEOs or their director of comms have come to us and said, look, can we try and put this past us, can we try and show you what we're doing that's really good, and show you why people are being paid this money and what the money is going towards. So again, you just have to sometimes just kind of accept that there are going to be those stories that you don't like. And again, all politicians know this, and it's just one of those things. But you just keep plugging away at that relationship and coming to us and saying, look, we've got this great story. This is a much better story around what the amazing work the hospice is doing. Never mind what we're paying this CEO. Come to us. Again, it's always about selling to us as journalists what the best story is. But don't be put off just because there's been a negative story. You should always try and push past that.
Yeah, absolutely. Draw a line under it and move on. And I think you can have the best working relationship in the world, but if something comes up that Richard feels is in the public interest but puts the hospice in a negative light, I would be mad to think that he just wouldn't run that story. He has a job to do in the same way that I have a job to do. I think if resources allow, we try to be as proactive as possible with those little controversial topics and have statements prepared. And that's something that we do as part of our strategy review annually, is what are those things that are likely to come up, either because they're always on the table, like executive pay, or things that potentially have got an increased profile in the coming year that we can anticipate. And we dedicate time where we can. We don't always have the resources to do it, but we try to have prepared statements for things like that, and FAQs that, you know, we've got kind of content ready so that if that does arise, we've already kind of got a response, we've got a rationalisation, we know what we want to say on that issue already, without kind of being on the back foot with it, really. And then, yeah, it's just about building from there, like you say, moving it on from there.
Thank you. Yeah, communication with your local journalists and with your teams is really key there. We've got a question here saying, what's your golden tip for ensuring good communication, specifically between clinical and comms teams? But Alice, you mentioned earlier about how sometimes the media coverage you'd got, if that was being kind of shared widely within your organisation, other teams could kind of use it to do things like leverage a discount on sales. So I suppose a question about how can you ensure really good communication internally so that every area of work can really benefit from that media coverage, or from your engagement with MPs as well?
Yeah, I mean, you just can't communicate enough internally, really. As much warning as possible. Obviously, some of these messages in our campaign were challenging. You know, it was about if something doesn't change, we might have to cut services. So, of course, you're going to raise staff's concerns around the financial viability of the organisation. So, it's briefing people as much as possible and as appropriate to do so, and maintaining that communication. I think more generally in terms of building relationships between clinical and non-clinical staff, that's something that starts from the very beginning. So I meet with all of our new staff at induction. I'm talking to them about the role that comms plays for the hospice and what they can do to support that. And that's not necessarily about them taking on responsibilities that are the marketing and comms team responsibilities. It's just about understanding that we all have a responsibility to share what the hospice is doing and make sure that we have access to those stories and that content, because without that we can't continue to sustain ourselves. So yeah, I think it's that really. It's kind of, and in terms of a golden tip, it is just about those focusing on building those relationships and making sure that staff have enough physical time with each other to build those relationships. And again, it's just finding, not everybody is going to be able to do that. Not every nurse is going to be passionate about finding those stories and helping the comms team bring them to life, but some of them will be. So it's about finding those and nurturing those relationships internally as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sure that idea of kind of over-communication is something you can agree with too, as you said, like that you cannot badger your local MP or local politician enough. I think we can quote you on that.
No.
So yeah, make sure you keep
Can I just come back
story.
to the previous point about salaries? I'm probably the one person in the room that most people ask in a straw poll, how much do I earn? Because you all know how much MPs earn. And I think there's still very much a bit of a British culture, isn't there, about hiding how much people earn and being a little bit embarrassed about that. But I think for any organisation, and particularly for organisations in the charitable sector, I think that transparency is absolutely key. You shouldn't be ashamed of how much you're paying your chief executive, because they've got an important job to do. It's a challenging job. It's in a competitive marketplace, and salary plays an important role in both recruitment and retention. When people talk about the salary that I earn, I immediately point to the salaries that the head teachers in the schools in my constituency or the senior officers in my local authority, many of whom are earning double what I earn, and working a fraction of the hours that I'm working. So I think that transparency is a good thing. You shouldn't be ashamed of what you're paying your chief executive if it's an appropriate salary.
Thank you.
I'm getting a round of applause from gentlemen down there. I think. Yeah.
Thank you all. I think we're probably running a little bit towards the end of the session, so we don't really have time for more questions, but there are plenty on here, so hang around maybe afterwards, and I'm sure people would like to talk to you. Just before we wrap up, I just wanted to kind of emphasise that Peter and Richard and Alice have all shown really just the benefits of working together and sharing information and having kind of open and honest communication. And from our point of view at Hospice UK, I wanted to stress that, we're here for you as you are our hospice members. We're here to share information with you, and if you need kind of statistics for media coverage, or if you need like advice before a political engagement, we're very much happy to share it. So don't be afraid to reach out to us, and we really want to make sure we're all kind of joined up and singing off the same hymn sheet. So you know how to reach us. I think you have our contact details, but also reach out to any of these guys as well. I'm sure they'd be happy to continue sharing their expertise and advice. But thank you all for taking part today, and thank you all for coming.